So in terms of the question, what kind of scientific frameworks do you use to approach the current COVID-19 crisis? As a historian of science and a science fiction enthusiast, I often turn to speculative fiction to engage with crisis. The current COVID-19 pandemic reminds me of Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, a text that is set in the 2020s, which we're in that decade now, where society has largely collapsed due to the climate crisis. And there's growing wealth inequality portrayed in this book, as well as corporate greed. And so the book by Butler centers on Lauren Oya Alamina, who possesses hyper-empathy or sharing, the ability to feel the pain and other sensations she witnesses. In many ways, like the protagonist, Lauren, I feel the pain of the global inequality from the pandemic, especially as it impacts racial minorities in North America and the United States, particularly Black Americans and Black people living there, as well as people living in the global South. And what history has shown us is that the consequences of contagion are not always equally felt by all communities. It is not the first time that I, for myself, have lived through an epidemic. My parents are Haitian, and I did fieldwork in Haiti when I was completing my master's in public health in 2010. And at the beginning of the cholera epidemic in Haiti, I was there, and I bore witness to how epidemics impacts a place like Haiti that has been devastated by an earthquake, colonialism, structural adjustment programs, so many other things. And it's in that respect and feeling that empathy that I try to think about how epidemics invite a host of feelings. Sometimes they're personal, sometimes they're political, but they often have an intimate connection with systems that are currently in place. The novel coronavirus, popularly known as COVID-19, has elicited old and ongoing memories about how to live through and survive these social contours of a pandemic. What is the biggest challenge that this crisis raises for you as a researcher? I think at the moment, the uncertainty is very difficult, and the inability to access the materials that I'm accustomed to, libraries, archives, etc. The inability to travel freely is posing some challenges, as well as having those organic face-to-face conferences, workshops, meetings, where the mind is stimulated by other people in a certain kind of way. So I miss the human capacity to gather, to debate, and to reflect in a collective fashion. And another difficult thing that's also happening is the overstimulation of a certain type of media or misinformation that's parsing through heaps of noise about what's going on. How does the new situation affect your scholarly collaborations? I'm learning to look beyond the ivory tower in academic spaces and to see how artists, everyday people, essential workers who are health workers, and or people who might not be directly involved with care, but janitors, cleaners, etc., and seeing what they're doing on the ground and hearing their testimonies, especially as people who might not always be heard on a global scale. There have been a plethora of resources, including online teach-ins with Haymarket books, or even just data collection by Data for Black Lives, which has been publishing phenomenal information on the health inequalities in the United States and how that impacts Black Americans. So I've been interviewing and publishing more of the podcast that I co-host at the Max-Planck-Institut for History of Science called Decolonization in Action. So it's a podcast that considers how knowledge, medicine, science, and the arts are being decolonized today. So in the season 2, which began about in March, we've been trying to intersperse our regular episodes, which often highlight the research and work of a scholar or an artist, with chronicles of how people are coping with coronavirus. And we've asked anti-colonial activists, migrants, and scholars, and LGBTQI people how they view the virus, what is happening in their communities, and how we can help those marginalized communities navigate through the current crisis. So what is it the current crisis illuminate about the role of the humanities? I would say that The humanities has been undergoing crisis since the 2008 economic crash, and even before that with the neoliberalization of universities. What is happening right now is another layer to that, I would add, and we were not able to physically gather in the ways that we've been accustomed to have conferences, to hold protests, to organize petitions. And it is a crisis that has exposed the need for more social and infrastructural investment, one that is taking the consideration of students and people from below. And it also means that we have to be mindful of those with disabilities, physical or otherwise, learning disabilities, and how we're going to be able to bear in mind their needs. Beyond that, this whole crisis is exposing the crisis of humanities and disparities for universities, academic institutions in the Global South, which may not always have the privilege and resources for online activities, etc. So what are the audience and people thinking about right now? I guess I want to know, how are people processing this moment and documenting what they're experiencing, and how are they finding moments of joy? I think that I want to also know, how are people building the capacity to engage with community and create a world that is more sustainable, environmentally just, and healthy for everyone, not just an elite few. So I guess overall, this is a moment of healing, a moment of rest for those of us that have that luxury. But it's also a moment for the earth to breathe, and it's a moment for us to think about what is the damage that's been done, and how can we heal and not leave anyone behind from this current global pandemic.